Celeste Rivers could see the masts of the sailboats bobbing gently in the marina, their silhouettes casting long shadows over the calm water. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But tonight, even beauty felt heavy. Inside, the grand chandelier in the foyer flickered on automatically as the clock struck 6. The soft hum of jazz floated through the house, piped in from built-in speakers that wrapped around every room. The dining room table gleamed under polished silver and hand-folded napkins. Everything in her world was in place. Everything except her. Celeste stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms loosely crossed, her navy silk dress hugging her frame with understated grace. It wasn't the designer gown Miles had suggested. That one had come straight from New York Fashion Week, still tagged, still stuffed with tissue paper. But this dress was hers. Simple, elegant, familiar. It had lived a life with her, through charity fundraisers, community reading nights, and dinner parties where she felt like a guest in her own home. Tonight was the Women of Impact Gala, and she would be attending alone. Again. Behind her, the kitchen buzzed with staff preparing light hors d'oeuvres. Her assistant, Natalie, adjusted the evening's schedule on a tablet. "Mrs. Rivers, the car will be ready in 15. Do you need help with your jewelry?" Celeste turned, offered a practiced smile. "Thank you, Natalie. I'm all set." She wasn't. Not really. But that wasn't Natalie's fault. As the assistant disappeared down the hall, Celeste reached for the silver locket, resting on the side table. It wasn't flashy, just a tiny oval with a photo of her late mother tucked inside. A school teacher from Columbia, her mom had never owned anything designer, never dined at Michelin star restaurants, and never once doubted her daughter's ability to hold her own in a room full of power. Celeste fastened the chain slowly. The cool metal rested right over her heart. Behind her, Miles's voice echoed from the speakerphone in the office. She walked toward it, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. I know, his voice rushed, breathless. "I hate missing this. But we've got the server crash in Tokyo and a board meeting at dawn. I tried to reschedule, I swear." She leaned into the doorway, folding her arms. "You don't have to apologize. I get it." A pause. "I'll make it up to you," he said, voice softer now. "Promise." Celeste wanted to believe him, and maybe she did. But belief was not the same as feeling seen. "I'll represent us both," she said with a lightness she didn't feel. "That's my girl." Another pause. "You're going to be the best-dressed woman there." She glanced at herself in the hallway mirror. "I'll settle for the most comfortable," she replied. And with that, she ended the call. The car ride to the Charleston waterfront pavilion was quiet. The driver, a kind-eyed man named Robert, tried to make small talk, but Celeste politely smiled through most of it. Her mind was elsewhere. The city passed by in soft blurs. The pastel-painted mansions, the hanging Spanish moss, the neatly lit streets with people out in linen and laughter. Everyone belonged to someone. Everyone had a place. And still, after 3 years of marriage, Celeste sometimes wondered if she had traded one form of invisibility for another. The Women of Impact Gala was the city's annual performance of progress. Tickets were expensive. Tables were pre-selected. And board seats, while technically elected, were always inherited through family, legacy, or unspoken alliances. Celeste was on the guest list because of Miles. She stayed on it because she didn't make waves. The valet opened her door as the flashes started. Just a few photographers from local outlets. Her name wasn't what brought them. But Miles's was. She stepped out calmly, giving a modest wave. A few whispers followed. She could hear them without needing to strain. That's Miles Rivers' wife, right? She's not what I expected. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Light cascaded from crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and dry champagne. At the center of it all stood Patricia Lancaster, chairwoman, social queen, Charleston royalty. Patricia wore white, a statement color, bold and territorial. Her necklace alone could pay off the student loans of 3 families. She didn't smile so much as scan, and her eyes landed on Celeste. "Darling," Patricia greeted, her voice floating like perfume. "So brave of you to come alone." Celeste offered her hand, cool and steady. "Miles sends his apologies." "Oh, don't worry. We all understand the pressures of startups." Patricia's pause lingered just long enough to sharpen the words. Celeste kept her smile intact. "We do." They stood like that, 2 women, each wrapped in silk and strategy. Patricia turned to the others nearby. "Celeste will be joining us at table 1 tonight." She said it with a flick of surprise, like it hadn't been her idea. One of the other women, tan, tight-skinned, a flawless southern bob, barely masked her glance down at Celeste's dress. Celeste followed them to the table, heart beating behind polite nods and practiced posture. She'd sat at this table before. She knew the rules. You don't speak unless spoken to. You never bring up work unless it's philanthropy. And you never, ever admit you feel out of place. But tonight, something was different. She sat straight, folded her napkin gently, and looked around. 10 women. 9 designer gowns. And her. When the waiter arrived with the wine menu, Patricia lifted her glass, voice just loud enough. "Red, please. Something bold." She glanced toward Celeste with a trace of a smirk. "We could use some flavor at this table." Laughter followed. Polite, hollow, complicit. Celeste lifted her water glass. "To boldness," she said, her voice calm, clear. The laughter stilled. Someone shifted in their chair. Patricia's smile tightened, and in that moment, Celeste didn't feel small. She felt present. Not Miles's wife, not the woman from Colombia, not the outsider trying to measure up. She was simply Celeste. And somehow, that was enough, for now. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The clink of glassware and the gentle hum of string instruments wrapped around the ballroom like silk. Laughter flowed from every corner, curated, restrained, the kind of laughter you only hear in rooms built on generational power and politely concealed envy. Celeste sat poised at table 1, hands folded in her lap, her smile measured. Across from her, Patricia sipped her wine slowly, eyes surveying the room like a queen scanning her court. Every movement Patricia made was deliberate. Every word, a calculated stroke. Celeste could feel the air between them shift every time they locked eyes. To the right, a conversation about real estate tax breaks unfolded between 2 board members. To the left, someone whispered about a senator's recent family scandal, softened with a chuckle. Celeste nodded where appropriate, offering soft affirmations, even when her mind drifted elsewhere. She wasn't new to these rooms anymore, but that didn't mean they ever felt like hers. Just then, the MC's voice echoed from the podium. Before we move on to tonight's keynote, please join me in welcoming back one of Charleston's most admired minds, our own Miles Rivers. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Celeste's heart skipped. She hadn't known he was coming. All heads turned to the entryway as Miles strode in, tall and calm in a midnight suit, his presence magnetic in the most unassuming way. His smile wasn't for the cameras. It was for her. Only her. She stood instinctively as he approached. He kissed her cheek with familiarity and warmth, then whispered, "Didn't want you to face this room alone." "You said the Tokyo situation." "Handled," he said, pulling her chair out gently. This mattered more. Patricia's smile never faltered, but her eyes did narrow, just slightly. "Well," she said, her voice light. "What a surprise. We were just enjoying Celeste's charm. She's been quite the gracious guest." Miles gave her a nod that was polite but flat. "She's always been gracious, even when she shouldn't have to be." The table fell silent, just long enough to feel it. A server appeared, refilling glasses. Miles took Celeste's hand under the table, giving it the smallest squeeze. She didn't need rescuing, but having him there, it softened the edges. As the event resumed, the next speaker took the stage, an elderly woman accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. Her speech was warm, filled with gentle jokes and sincere gratitude. But Celeste found herself only half listening. She was watching Patricia. There was something in Patricia's expression that wasn't just vanity or control. It was something older, a tightness in the jaw. The way she corrected the placement of her spoon, the fleeting glance at her phone under the table, the occasional flick of her gaze toward Miles, then quickly away. It wasn't jealousy. It was something colder, possession. Patricia leaned in slightly, addressing Celeste. "It's always interesting to see how our husbands manage these rooms, isn't it?" Celeste tilted her head. "I don't manage Miles. He doesn't need me to." Patricia gave a small laugh. "That's not what I meant, but you're right. Some people are simply natural at navigating power. And some just inherit it," Celeste replied, her voice calm. Another beat of silence. The applause at the end of the speech snapped the tension, but Celeste could feel the current running beneath the table. Later, during the cocktail intermission, Celeste excused herself to the courtyard terrace for a moment of air. The garden lights shimmered on the surface of the fountain, and the faint scent of jasmine lingered in the night air. Miles joined her quietly, sliding beside her on the stone bench. "Was that too much?" he asked, softly. "What?" "The comment to Patricia. The tone." Celeste breathed in deep. "No. It was unexpected. But maybe it needed to be." Miles looked at her, studying her face. "You always do this thing when you're trying to stay composed. Your shoulders tense like you're bracing for a wave." She laughed under her breath. "Maybe I am. She tries to corner you, doesn't she?" Celeste hesitated. "Not just me. Anyone she thinks doesn't fit the mold." "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head. "Not yet. If I leave now, I become a story." Miles nodded. "So we stay together." Before either could speak again, a familiar voice interrupted. "I hope I'm not intruding." Patricia stood at the edge of the terrace, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Her posture was effortless, but her eyes were sharp. "Of course not," Celeste said smoothly. Patricia handed a glass to Celeste and held the other without sipping. "I just wanted to say how much I admire your grace. You've done well adjusting to all this." Celeste blinked. "Adjusting? This world, these rooms. You carry yourself beautifully, considering how different things must be from where you started." The words were dipped in honey, but Celeste heard the message beneath. Miles opened his mouth, but Celeste touched his arm, stopping him. "I suppose that's true," she said, her voice even. "But then, I found the real adjustment is learning that money doesn't always come with kindness or class." Patricia's smile flickered. Celeste continued gently, "Still, I appreciate the sentiment. It takes practice to see people fully, doesn't it?" A silence settled. Then, for the briefest moment, something shifted in Patricia's expression. A crack in the mask. Regret? Resentment? Even she wasn't sure. She turned toward the fountain. "The first time I came to this event, I wore borrowed pearls. I smiled until my face ached, and I still left that night knowing I didn't belong." Celeste looked at her. "And now, I make sure no one forgets I do." And with that, she turned and walked away. Miles exhaled. Well, that was loaded. "She told me her truth," Celeste said quietly, "even if it came wrapped in thorns." They sat in silence for a moment. In the distance, the orchestra played something slow and haunting. Miles finally said, "I don't like how she talks to you." "I don't think she likes how I exist," Celeste replied. Then she looked up at the stars scattered across the Charleston sky. "But I'm here, and I'm not shrinking." The ballroom shimmered when they returned. Same music, same laughter, same curated elegance. But something had shifted. Not in the room, in her. Celeste walked back in beside Miles. Head held a little higher, shoulders looser. Her heart still beat with that steady thump of uncertainty, but beneath it was something firmer, something rooted. Patricia's words on the terrace hadn't wounded her. They had revealed her. Inside, servers glided past with polished trays and champagne flutes. A string quartet played a soft rendition of a jazz standard, blending nostalgia with class. Celeste's heels clicked in sync with Miles's as they made their way back to table 1. Except the mood at the table had changed. A new guest had joined. She was younger, mid-30s maybe, with dark curls pinned into a stylish bun and a sharp blazer draped over her chair instead of a gown. She was laughing, freely, not politely, and somehow the women around her didn't flinch. They leaned in. Miles lit up. "Frankie?" The woman turned and her face broke into a bright grin. "I thought that was you," she said, rising. "Didn't expect to see you at one of these." Celeste looked between them, a flicker of curiosity passing through her. Frankie reached out and offered her hand. "Francesca Wu, but everyone calls me Frankie. Journalist, recovering academic, friend of Miles from our startup hell days." Celeste shook her hand. "Celeste Rivers." "Oh, I know," Frankie said with a wink. "You're the reason half the investors call Miles that lucky guy." A ripple of laughter moved through the table. Patricia, still seated with her wine untouched, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Frankie slipped back into her chair, crossing one leg over the other with ease. "I crashed this thing last minute. Apparently someone dropped out. Maybe scandal, maybe food poisoning. I'm hoping for scandal." Miles grinned. "Frankie's doing a piece on women and wealth in Southern leadership. I thought this would be a perfect place for her to soak it in." Patricia finally spoke. "That explains the voice recorder on your lap." Frankie didn't miss a beat. "It's off, for now." Celeste smiled, but watched Patricia's reaction closely. There was something in the way Patricia gripped her wine stem, a hesitation, maybe even caution. "Do you write often about women in philanthropy?" Celeste asked. Frankie tilted her head. "Lately, yes. Mostly how image and power intersect in spaces that were never built for us. There's a lot of performance in these rooms, but even more silence." Patricia's tone turned smooth. "I imagine silence is sometimes necessary to preserve dignity." Frankie met her gaze, unflinching. "And sometimes it's weaponized to maintain control." A beat. Miles coughed lightly, diffusing the tension. "She's been making people nervous in boardrooms since grad school." "Sounds like she's exactly who we need more of," Celeste said softly. Patricia turned toward Celeste, her voice even. "And yet, some of us prefer not to air our battles in public." Frankie raised her glass. "To each her own war." The conversation pivoted. Talk turned to upcoming galas, potential mergers between non-profits, and which restaurants had reopened post-renovation. But beneath the tablecloth and pleasantries, the current of tension ran deep. Celeste felt it, like invisible hands pulling at her. And then, an unexpected voice cut across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please." It was the MC again, standing with a cordless mic at the center of the room. "We'd like to take a moment to honor an anonymous donor whose recent contribution will sponsor free literacy programs in 6 underserved communities across Charleston County." A hush fell over the crowd. "We don't know who you are," he continued with a warm smile, "but your generosity will change hundreds of lives. If you're in the room tonight, thank you." Celeste inhaled slowly. It was her. She had made the donation through a foundation account Miles helped her set up months ago. Quiet, intentional, no press, no fanfare. And now it was public, still anonymous, but seen. Frankie turned slowly to her, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "That wasn't you, was it?" Celeste said nothing, just sipped her water. Frankie leaned in, lowering her voice. "It's okay. Some stories don't need bylines." Celeste's eyes flicked across the table. Patricia's gaze was fixed on her, not hostile, more like recognition, a puzzle piece that had just found its place. The applause died down, and the music resumed. But for Celeste, the rhythm had changed. Later, while Miles spoke with an investor across the room, Frankie found her alone by the dessert table. "You know," Frankie said, "I've been writing this piece on how women are reshaping power in the South without trying to look like they're reshaping power." Celeste raised a brow. "That sounds dangerous." Frankie grinned. "Only to the ones who've never had to fight for their seat at the table." They stood quietly for a moment. "Can I ask you something personal?" Frankie asked. "Depends on how personal. When you walked into that ballroom tonight, did you feel powerful or just prepared?" Celeste thought about it. "I felt like I couldn't afford to be either," she said. "Not in the way they define it. But I also knew I wasn't going to shrink." Frankie nodded as if filing it away. "I'd like to profile you," she said. "Not as Miles's wife. As Celeste." Celeste looked over at Patricia, now speaking with 2 younger women who hung on her every word, then at Miles, who was smiling politely through another pitch he didn't care about. Then at herself, reflected in the glass of a silver tray, the locket still resting at her collarbone. "You can start," she said, "by not calling me lucky." Frankie's smile widened. "Deal." The room continued to buzz around them. But for the first time that night, Celeste didn't feel like she was simply existing within it. She felt like she had moved it, even just an inch. And for now, that inch was everything. If you enjoyed this video, Comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. The ballroom had begun to settle into that late evening rhythm, music a touch slower, drinks a little stronger, conversations turning from polished surface to whispered subtext. The auctioneer had just closed bidding on a luxury island retreat package, and applause scattered through the room like scattered rain. Celeste returned to table 1 with a fresh flute of sparkling water in hand. She caught Miles's eye from across the room. He was still locked in a conversation with a board member, but he gave her the kind of glance that said, "I'm here, even when I'm not beside you." She took her seat. Patricia was back at the table too, perfectly composed, sipping what appeared to be her second or fourth glass of wine. The light caught her earrings as she tilted her head, watching Celeste in that way someone might study a rare piece of art. Admiration mixed with subtle doubt. "I hear congratulations are in order," Patricia said softly. Celeste turned her head. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, don't play modest. The anonymous donation?" Patricia's voice was low, like she was passing along privileged gossip. 6 entire communities. That's not just generous. That's strategic. Celeste smiled politely. It was necessary. Patricia let the silence stretch between them. Then her eyes wandered to the neckline of Celeste's dress, lingering briefly on the small silver locket. "Beautiful piece," she said. "Heirloom?" "My mother's," Celeste replied. Patricia nodded slowly, as if calculating the weight of sentiment against the price of the jewelry she wore herself. "You know," Patricia continued, swirling the wine in her glass, "I've chaired this event for nearly 8 years. I've seen philanthropists come and go, seen people buy their way into influence, but very few change the energy of a room without trying." Celeste didn't answer right away. "Is that your way of saying I don't belong here?" Patricia's smile tightened. "It's my way of saying people are watching." The air between them turned colder. Then, as if on cue, the waitstaff appeared, weaving through the tables with small dishes of crème brûlée and coffee service. One young server, barely older than 20, approached Patricia from behind with a silver tray of cappuccinos. Patricia turned slightly, and in one swift, fluid motion, her elbow knocked into the tray. A cup tilted, its contents tumbling, straight towards Celeste. It all happened in seconds. A soft gasp, a porcelain clink, a splash of warm froth across Celeste's lap. The room froze, not in shock, but in attention. All eyes turned toward table 1. Patricia blinked, turned, and placed a hand over her heart. "Oh, dear. I didn't see him behind me. I'm so terribly sorry." The server stood frozen, mouth open in horror. Ma'am, I didn't mean." Celeste sat perfectly still. Her dress, silk, navy, elegant, was now stained in a wide, creamy arc across her lap. Miles was already moving toward her from the other side of the room. Frankie, standing nearby, narrowed her eyes and stepped forward. But Celeste raised her hand slightly. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. Not yet. She simply reached for the cloth napkin folded at the table. Carefully, with measured precision, she dabbed at the stain. Not hurried. Not ashamed. Patricia remained standing, hovering above her like a queen offering concern. "Should I have the staff bring you another chair? Or perhaps you'd like to excuse yourself for a moment?" Celeste looked up. Her voice was soft, but cut through the noise like a single violin string in a quiet hall. "I think I'll stay." Patricia blinked. Of course. If you're sure. I'm sure, Celeste said, locking eyes with her. It takes more than a little spill to shake me. The words hung in the air, wrapped in silk and steel. Frankie exhaled sharply, almost a laugh, but covered it with a cough. Miles arrived at her side and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, quietly. Celeste didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Patricia. "I'm perfect." A pause. Then a few soft claps started, first from a woman at a neighboring table, then from across the room, a dozen hands, then more applause. Not for the spill, not for the recovery, for the poise, for the choice not to be humiliated, for the silent power of a woman refusing to flinch. Patricia sat back down slowly, her face unreadable. The server, red-faced, whispered a trembling apology to Celeste. She leaned toward him and whispered back, "It's not your fault." And just like that, the room moved on, or tried to. The music resumed, too bright now. The conversation returned, too forced. The energy had shifted in a way no one could quite name. Later, as they left the ballroom, Miles walked beside her in silence. The air outside was cool and damp, the scent of salt water wrapping around them. "Was that really an accident?" he asked. Celeste didn't answer at first. Then she said, "You know what my mother used to say?" "What?" "Accidents happen when people stop pretending to care." Miles slid his hand into hers. "You didn't even blink," he said. She looked up at him. "I couldn't afford to." At the car, Frankie was waiting. "I'm going to write about this," she said softly. "Not just the spill, the whole thing. You realize that, right?" Celeste paused, and then, with the faintest curve of her lips, "I hope you do." She slid into the car, the locket cool against her skin, the stain on her dress still visible, but so was her silence. And sometimes, silence was the loudest statement of all. The following morning, the Charleston sun rose with its usual softness, golden light spilling over the water, casting everything in a gentle warmth. But inside the river's home, the atmosphere was thick, stretched tight between what had happened the night before and what might happen next. Celeste stood in the kitchen barefoot, her silk robe tied loosely at the waist, one hand wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. She stared out the window, eyes fixed on the herons gliding over the marsh. But her mind was far from serene. The stained dress from the gala hung on a hook by the laundry room. She hadn't sent it out for cleaning. Not yet. Miles entered quietly, dressed down in jeans and a cotton tee, rare for a man who usually lived in tailored blazers and back-to-back meetings. He crossed the room, pressed a kiss to her temple. "You didn't sleep," he murmured. Celeste exhaled a quiet laugh. "Neither did you." He opened the fridge, scanned it absently, then closed it again without taking anything. "Do you want to talk about it? About Patricia? About the whole thing, the way it unraveled, the applause, Frankie lurking with a notepad, the spill?" He hesitated. "What happens next?" Celeste turned slowly to face him. "You think it's going to become something?" Miles leaned against the counter. "It already has. I had 2 missed calls from board members this morning, one from the mayor's office, and one anonymous text that just said, 'She didn't deserve that.'" Celeste arched a brow. "Who's she?" "You." He paused. "Maybe Patricia, depending on who sent it." They exchanged a look. Then Miles asked the question that had been hanging between them all night. "You think it was on purpose?" Celeste didn't answer immediately. She ran her fingers along the rim of her mug, the heat grounding her. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters." She shook her head. Not really. Because whether it was a mistake or a message, everyone in that room saw it. And they watched how she handled it. And they watched how I handled it. Miles pushed off the counter, walked to her, and took the mug from her hands. He set it down gently, then took her hands in his. What you did, staying seated, staying calm, that wasn't passive. That was power. I wasn't trying to show power, Celeste said, her voice low. I was trying not to lose myself. A silence passed between them. Then, Miles said, Frankie's already posted something. Celeste's eyes narrowed. What kind of something? He pulled out his phone, tapped twice, and handed it to her. It was a photo, taken just after the spill. Celeste, seated at the table, calm and composed, dabbing at her dress while Patricia hovered above her. The caption read, What does grace look like in the face of humiliation? Sometimes it looks like a woman who doesn't flinch, who doesn't retreat, who doesn't give anyone the satisfaction of watching her break. The table moment. Southern power. Celeste stared at it. Thousands of likes, hundreds of shares, dozens of comments, many from women, some she knew, most she didn't. This is why we need more women like her. The poise, I would have cried. She made it look like art. You can't buy that kind of strength. But there were other comments too. It was probably an accident. People overreact about everything these days. Why is this even a story? Celeste handed the phone back. It's already being twisted. Miles nodded. Frankie wants to come over, just to talk. She says she'll tread lightly. Celeste considered that, then said, Let her come. Later that afternoon, Frankie arrived with iced matcha lattes and a voice recorder tucked into her tote bag but untouched. They sat on the porch overlooking the marsh. The wind was light, the Spanish moss in the trees swaying like it had secrets. I didn't plan to make it go viral, Frankie said, sipping through a straw. But I also didn't plan for someone to dump a cappuccino on the city's most composed woman either. Celeste smiled faintly. That photo makes it look like I had a plan. I didn't. I just couldn't give Patricia the story she wanted. Frankie raised an eyebrow. And what story was that? The one where I fall apart. Frankie nodded slowly. That's what I thought too. But here's the thing. Your silence said more than 100 speeches. And now, people want to know who you are, what you believe in, where you came from. Celeste looked out over the water. I came from a neighborhood with cracked sidewalks and teachers who bought their own chalk. A mother who worked weekends and still cooked dinner from scratch. A church that doubled as a shelter when hurricanes came through. I don't think that's what they're asking. It's exactly what they're asking, Frankie replied. They just don't have the language for it. Celeste turned to face her. You want to tell my story? Frankie hesitated. Only if you want it told. Celeste's fingers brushed the locket at her chest. Then it has to be mine, my voice, my timing, my truth. Frankie nodded. We can start wherever you want. Celeste stood, letting the breeze wash over her. The marsh smelled like salt and summer rain. She didn't feel small here. She felt rooted. Start with the night Patricia offered me a seat at her table, she said. And the moment I realized I didn't need it to stand. Frankie's smile was quiet, respectful. Okay. As she packed up her things and left, Celeste lingered on the porch. Inside, her phone buzzed. A new message from Ruthie. Saw what happened. Proud of you. Let me know when you want to come by the center. We got new kids in the poetry program. Celeste smiled. The story was no longer just about a spilled drink or a social misstep. It was becoming something else, something deeper. And she knew, without a doubt, the ripples were only just beginning. The next morning, Celeste sat quietly in front of the vanity mirror, running a brush through her hair with slow, thoughtful strokes. The sunlight poured through the gauzy linen curtains, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. But her mind wasn't on the day ahead. It was on the message Frankie had sent her late the night before. The table moment is being picked up by a national blog. It's snowballing. You might want to prepare. Celeste had stared at it for a full minute, her thumb hovering above the screen, heart tight in her chest. She hadn't replied. Now, sitting alone with only the tick of the antique clock in the hall and the faint chirp of cardinals outside, she felt it creeping in, an invisible shift, like the tide pulling out before a storm. Miles appeared in the doorway, tie in hand, looking at her through the mirror. "Still no appetite?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Too much noise in my stomach." He came behind her, wrapped his arms around her shoulders, and kissed the top of her head. "Whatever happens today, you've already won." She didn't answer right away. Then finally said, "Winning still feels a lot like waiting to be judged." He met her gaze in the mirror. "Then let them watch. Let them measure. You already know who you are." She turned to face him, touched the knot of his tie. "It's easy to forget that in a world where everyone else wants to rewrite your name." He smiled softly. "Then you say it louder." He left for work a few minutes later, but Celeste remained at the vanity, staring at her reflection, not in vanity, but in wonder. This was the same woman who had walked into that gala, the same woman who had smiled through the tight-lipped condescension, who had wiped cappuccino from her dress with grace while the world paused to see if she'd crumble. But somehow, she felt different now. Later that day, she stepped into the community center, a small brick building tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the east side of town. The air inside smelled like pencil shavings, floor polish, and faint traces of yesterday's cinnamon rolls. "Celeste!" Ruthie waved from behind the reception desk, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "Girl, I was about to come find you myself." Celeste smiled, the tension in her chest softening slightly. "I missed this place." "You missed more than that." Ruthie leaned in, eyes wide with mischief. "We saw that video clip. You looked like a queen, didn't flinch. Half the internet wants to know what perfume you were wearing when you took that coffee bath." Celeste laughed, shaking her head. "I wasn't trying to go viral, Ruthie." "No, but the truth has a funny way of wanting to be seen. And baby, you wore yours like armor." They hugged tightly. There was something healing in Ruthie's embrace, solid, warm, no performance. "I've got a group of fifth graders in the poetry room," Ruthie said, pulling back. "Want to drop in?" Celeste nodded. "Please." The poetry room was small and sunlit, with mismatched beanbags, stacks of colored notebooks, and a chalkboard filled with scribbled phrases like, "What does it mean to be brave?" and "Tell the story only you can tell." A dozen kids sat cross-legged on the floor, all heads turning as Celeste entered. Ruthie clapped once. "All right, y'all, we've got a special visitor today. Some of you may have already seen her online, but in here, she's just Celeste, and she's got a story." Celeste knelt beside a young girl who looked barely 9, her notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. "I'm not sure I have a story," Celeste said softly, "but I know I've walked through a few chapters I didn't expect." One boy raised his hand. "Is it true someone spilled coffee on you on purpose?" A girl beside him whispered, "It wasn't coffee. It was cappuccino." Celeste smiled. "I'm not sure what her intention was, but I know what mine was. Don't let anyone else decide who I get to be in that moment." A quiet hush settled over the group. Another girl raised her hand. "Did it hurt?" Celeste thought about that. Not physically, but sometimes the things that hurt the most don't leave bruises. They just make you wonder if you're enough. The kids sat in thoughtful silence. Then the boy said, "But you looked like you didn't care." Celeste nodded. "That's the tricky part. Looking like it doesn't matter, when it really, really does." After the session, Ruthie walked her out to the parking lot. "You do realize these kids are going to be writing about coffee and courage for weeks now, right?" Celeste laughed. "I'll take it." Just as she was about to unlock her car, her phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, quiet and restrained. "Celeste, it's Patricia." Celeste stilled. "How did you get this number?" "I asked Miles's assistant." A pause. Then Patricia continued. "I'd like to speak with you, in person. No press, no fanfare." Celeste leaned against the driver's door, pulse rising. "Why?" "Because there are some things I need to say, and I'm beginning to realize that silence is only dignified until it becomes complicit." Another pause. Then Celeste said, "Where?" Patricia responded without hesitation. "There's a bench outside St. Augustine's Chapel. The one by the garden wall. Tomorrow, noon." The line went dead. Celeste stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, wind brushing past her like a whisper. The central conflict that had brewed for weeks, unspoken, unconfirmed, was about to shift. And for the first time, she felt something that surprised her more than anger ever could. Curiosity. The morning air carried a gentle stillness as Celeste turned onto the narrow road that led to St. Augustine's Chapel. Spanish moss hung heavy from the trees above, draping the path in soft shadows. Everything about the day felt delicate, even the light. She pulled into the gravel lot and turned off the engine, but she didn't move. Her hands stayed on the wheel as her eyes found the bench near the garden wall, empty, save for the whisper of wind stirring the leaves around it. Why had she come? She didn't owe Patricia anything. Not an explanation, not her time, not her grace. And yet, here she was. Celeste stepped out of the car, each footfall crunching softly against the gravel. She wore a simple navy dress, her curls pulled back with a pearl clip, her locket resting quietly at her collarbone. No armor, just presence. She approached the bench slowly, then sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then, footsteps. Patricia appeared from the side of the chapel, wrapped in a cream shawl, her heels low and careful on the stone path. Her face looked different in daylight, less polished, more human. "Celeste," she said quietly, almost like an apology in itself. Celeste nodded but didn't speak. Patricia eased onto the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. The silence stretched. Then, finally, Patricia exhaled. "I owe you more than just an apology." Celeste turned, her voice even. "I didn't come here for an apology." Patricia looked down at her hands. "Then why did you come?" "I wanted to see what honesty looked like on your face." Patricia flinched. Not from offense, but truth. She nodded slowly. "Fair." She clasped her hands tighter. "That night at the gala, when the coffee spilled, it was an accident, but one I didn't rush to correct, and I let it hang in the air like maybe you deserved it." Celeste's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "I've spent a long time guarding a world that always felt like it could slip from my fingers," Patricia continued. Status. Respect. Invitations. I built my place in that room brick by brick, and when you walked in, with your calm, your beauty, your quiet strength, I saw something I didn't expect. Celeste's eyes narrowed. What? Someone who didn't need the room to feel powerful. Patricia looked over at her, eyes glassy. You were everything I pretended to be. Celeste inhaled deeply. The breeze stirred a loose strand of her hair. And so, you tried to remind me that I didn't belong. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment. Yes. Another pause passed. Then Patricia said softly, My marriage is not what it looks like, Celeste. My friendships are curated. My philanthropy, strategic. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that authenticity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Celeste turned fully toward her. Then, why speak now? Patricia hesitated. Because the way you sat at that table, that moment has haunted me. Not because you embarrassed me. You didn't. But because you reflected something I forgot existed. Integrity. The word hung in the air. Patricia swallowed. And because my daughter saw the clip, and she asked me why the lady didn't yell. Celeste blinked, caught off guard. Your daughter? She's 17, smart, more observant than I'd like to admit. She said, Mom, why did that woman look so calm, like she didn't care what anyone thought? And I didn't know how to answer her without unraveling everything I've built. Celeste looked out at the garden. The flowers were simple, azaleas, hydrangeas, scattered wild roses, unfussy, beautiful in their lack of performance. You could start by telling her the truth, she said gently. Patricia's voice trembled. That I was wrong? That you were afraid. Patricia wiped at her eyes. Celeste, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say this, out loud, to you. Celeste's expression softened. It's not forgiveness that changes people. It's accountability. Silence again, but this time not heavy, honest. Patricia nodded, as if a weight had shifted, not lifted. Then she said, I've submitted my resignation from the event committee, and I'm starting a mentorship program for young women who want to lead but aren't invited to the table. Celeste raised a brow. That's a start. I hope you'll be part of it. Celeste stood slowly, smoothing the front of her dress. We'll see. Patricia remained seated, eyes following her as she walked toward the parking lot. Celeste? She turned. I meant it when I said you changed the energy in the room, Patricia said. But what stayed with me was the way you stayed seated. Not because you were frozen, but because you knew you didn't have to move to be seen. Celeste gave a small, quiet smile. Funny. I didn't feel seen that night. You were, Patricia whispered. By all the women who've ever had to swallow grace like it was survival. Celeste walked to her car, the air warm against her skin. Her phone buzzed as she reached the door. It was from Frankie. Just got off a call. The story's getting a podcast feature. National. They want to interview you. Celeste didn't respond right away. She looked back once, toward the chapel, the bench, the woman who once tried to shrink her. Then she opened the car door, slid inside, and whispered to herself, Let them hear it from me. Celeste sat on the edge of the soundproofed podcast studio chair, headphones snug around her ears, her heart thrumming with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. It was different from nerves. This wasn't stage fright. It was the weight of being heard, truly heard, without the filter of headlines, whispers, or hashtags. Across from her sat Talia Green, the host of Unspoken Power, a nationally syndicated podcast known for its intimate, unflinching conversations with women reshaping culture from the inside out. Talia was poised but warm. Her voice was a blend of velvet and steel. "We're recording in 3, 2. The red light blinked on. The room fell silent. "Today's guest," Talia began, "is a woman who never planned to be a headline. And yet, her silence at one gala dinner sparked a national conversation on dignity, power, and the quiet strength it takes not to fight back, but to stand still and stand firm. Celeste Rivers, welcome." Celeste leaned into the mic, her voice steady. "Thank you for having me." Talia smiled, folding her hands. "Let's start with the moment. You've been called the woman who didn't flinch. Tell me, what was going through your mind when that coffee spilled?" Celeste hesitated only for a breath. It wasn't just the coffee. It was everything behind it. Every look. Every sentence wrapped in sugar, but laced with something sour. That moment wasn't new to me. It was just finally visible. Talia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Visible is the right word, because so many women, especially women of color, said they saw themselves in that moment, in your calm, your composure, your refusal to let it define you. Celeste let her eyes drop to her hands. What most people don't know is, I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream. But I knew, if I did, the story would change. I wouldn't be the woman who stayed poised. I'd be the overreaction, the drama. I wasn't afraid of losing control. I was afraid of being rewritten. The air grew still. Talia leaned forward. "And did it cost you anything?" Celeste looked up. Her voice was soft but certain. "Yes, it cost me the illusion that grace is enough to protect you. But it gave me something more valuable, a chance to redefine what strength looks like." They spoke for nearly an hour. About power structures, about the stories women swallow, about the difference between reputation and legacy. When the interview ended, Talia turned off the mic and removed her headphones. "Celeste," she said, "there are going to be a lot of women who walk taller because of this." Celeste smiled faintly. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want women to stop apologizing for taking up space." Outside the studio, the air was brisk. Autumn had started to slip into Charleston's bones, brushing the trees with a whisper of gold. Celeste pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the street, only to find Ruthie waiting by her car with a bag of pastries and a look that was part pride, part warning. "You know you're famous now, right?" Ruthie said, handing her the bag. "I had 3 women in line at the bakery asking if I knew you. One of them said, 'She makes silence feel like a sermon.'" Celeste chuckled. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "It's Charleston," Ruthie replied. "It's both." They leaned against the car, watching the sun dip behind the Spanish moss-draped oaks. For a moment, everything was still. Then Ruthie cleared her throat. "I need to ask you something, and you might not like it." Celeste looked at her. "Go ahead. Why haven't you said anything about Patricia's mentorship program?" Celeste stiffened slightly. "Because I'm still deciding how I feel about it." "She's using her name now, you know," Ruthie said. "Told the press that she learned the hard way that inclusion isn't charity, it's equity." I almost dropped my croissant. Celeste exhaled slowly. "People don't change overnight." "No," Ruthie said. "But they start somewhere, and sometimes it takes watching someone else hold a mirror up to them." Celeste looked down at the ground. A memory flickered in her mind. Patricia, voice shaking, saying, My daughter saw you and asked why you didn't yell. She wants me involved, Celeste said quietly. And I don't know if I want to build something beside someone who once tried to knock me down. Ruthie reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. Then don't build beside her. Build above her. Let her come up the stairs this time. That night, Celeste sat on the porch of their home, curled into a blanket with a glass of tea. Miles joined her without a word, handing her a letter that had arrived by courier. The envelope was creamy white, thick, handwritten. She opened it slowly. Inside, one page. Patricia's handwriting was precise, but not stiff. Celeste, today, 3 young women signed up for the mentorship program. One of them said, I saw a video of a woman who looked like my mother, and she didn't flinch. That's what started this. Not me. You. I know I can't erase what I did, or what I didn't do, but I can learn, I can grow, and I can keep the door open for others who never had the key. Thank you for being the mirror. Patricia Celeste folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her tea. She didn't say anything. Miles watched her. You don't have to respond. I know. But you might want to. She nodded. I just need to figure out what my voice sounds like, when it's not just defending my presence, but shaping the room itself. And somewhere, far beyond the porch, past the garden and the gated front walk, Celeste could feel it. A shift. She wasn't just part of a conversation anymore. She was becoming the author of it. It was late afternoon when Celeste arrived at the waterfront event space, a sleek, modern building tucked just off East Bay Street, with wide glass doors that reflected the harbor like mirrors. The mentorship program's kickoff gala was being held here, an intimate event for press, donors, and a select group of mentees who would be introduced that evening. She paused before entering, her reflection staring back at her, dignified, elegant, but thoughtful. She hadn't planned to attend at first. She'd told herself she needed more time. But the letter Patricia had sent, and more importantly, the quiet words from that girl in the poetry room, did it hurt? Had been sitting in her chest like an unanswered question. She didn't come tonight to support Patricia. She came because sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one you pull out for someone else. Inside, soft jazz floated through the room, and servers moved like shadows with trays of sparkling water and petite hors d'oeuvres. The walls were adorned with portraits of women, young, old, black, Latina, Asian, white, each paired with handwritten quotes about resilience and leadership. Celeste's eyes lingered on one. I stopped asking for permission the day I realized I already belonged. She took a slow breath, then another. Celeste. She turned. Patricia stood a few feet away, dressed in a deep emerald gown, her face free of its usual armor. No rehearsed smile, no postured pride, just presence, vulnerable, a little uncertain. I wasn't sure you'd come, Patricia said quietly. I wasn't sure I would either, Celeste replied. Patricia glanced down, then looked back up. You should know, I didn't include you on the program because I didn't want to assume, but if you're willing, I'd like to invite you to speak. Celeste arched an eyebrow. You're asking me 5 minutes before the event starts? I'm asking because I trust you'll know exactly what to say, and because I know this event doesn't mean anything if your voice isn't part of it. Celeste tilted her head slightly, watching her. You've changed. I'm still changing, Patricia admitted. But I've stopped pretending I know better than the women I once dismissed. The band shifted to a soft instrumental, and the lights dimmed as guests began to find their seats. Patricia touched Celeste's arm gently. I hope you'll stay, even if you don't speak. Celeste nodded. I'll decide when I hear what the room needs. Patricia walked off toward the stage, leaving Celeste alone with her thoughts. She glanced toward the back, where Frankie was already jotting notes in her small leather-bound pad, her eyes flicking between conversations like a journalist stitching a quilt from fragments. Celeste made her way to a quiet corner and found a chair, just off to the side, but with a full view of the podium. The event began. First came the host, a vibrant young woman named Layla, a former mentee of another program who now worked in education policy. Her energy was magnetic. She spoke about doors that never existed for girls like her until someone built them from scratch. Then came Patricia. She approached the mic slowly, her voice measured. I stand here tonight, not as a leader, she said, but as someone who once stood in a room and made the mistake of thinking power was something you had to protect, instead of something you're meant to share. The room listened, silent and still. I've learned that real leadership is uncomfortable. It's humbling. And it begins with listening to the voices we once ignored. Sometimes, even our own daughters remind us of the woman we're still trying to become. Patricia stepped back from the mic, her eyes finding Celeste across the room. And in that moment, without needing permission, Celeste rose to her feet. All eyes followed her. She walked slowly to the stage, her heels quiet against the polished wood floor. When she reached the podium, she paused, not to find her place in notes, but to find her breath. She looked out across the room, at young faces filled with hope, at older ones holding back tears. And she spoke. When I was young, I thought power looked like applause, like being the one with the mic, the spotlight, the invitation. But over time, I learned, real power is quieter. It's the ability to remain yourself in rooms that expect you to shrink. The room leaned in. The night of that gala, I didn't stay seated because I was trying to make a statement. I stayed seated because I refused to let someone else choose how I would rise. A wave of emotion passed through the room. Celeste continued, her voice now softer. Tonight is not about redemption for one person. It's about recognition for all the women who have carried dignity on their backs like armor, who have walked into rooms and made them better just by being whole. She glanced toward the portraits on the wall, then back to the crowd. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to fight to matter. Sometimes, all it takes is to be still long enough for the world to see what it's been missing. She stepped away from the podium, and the applause wasn't loud. It was slow, respectful, deep, the kind that builds not from excitement, but understanding. Celeste returned to her seat without fanfare, her chest full, not of pride, but peace. Later, as guests mingled and the music swelled again, a young girl with tight curls and wide eyes approached her. Miss Rivers? She asked shyly. Yes, sweetheart. The girl clutched a notepad to her chest. I want to be a writer, but sometimes people say I talk too soft, that I need to speak up if I want to be heard. Celeste crouched down to her level, looked her in the eye. Your voice matters exactly the way it is, she said. Don't let them confuse volume with value. The girl grinned, then dashed off toward her mother. Celeste stood slowly, her gaze drifting to the open doors that led to the harbor outside. The breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility. Beside her, Patricia appeared, hands clasped, expression unreadable. "I'll never forget that," she said. Celeste smiled faintly. "Neither will I." And just like that, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship, but respect. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. The next morning, Celeste sat at the kitchen island with a cup of chamomile tea, letting the steam curl against her face as soft light filtered through the windows. The house was quiet. Miles had left early for a board meeting, and the only sound was the distant hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. She tapped her phone screen and scrolled through the dozens of new notifications that had piled up overnight. Articles, tweets, a video clip of her speech from the gala already had over 400,000 views. But it was the comments that made her breath catch in her chest. "I watched this 5 times and cried each time. Thank you for showing us how to rise with dignity. This is what power looks like. Not loud, not cruel, just true. My mother was Celeste. She never got the mic. Thank you for holding it now." She sat still for a long time, the weight of their words pressing into her. Not heavy, just deep, as if they were anchoring her to something more meaningful than applause. The doorbell rang. Celeste frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She crossed the hall and opened the door to find Frankie, standing there with a cardboard box in her arms and her signature oversized sunglasses pushed up into her curls. "You should probably sit down," Frankie said without preamble. Celeste stepped aside. "That's how you start a morning?" Frankie breezed in, dropped the box onto the dining table, and pulled out her phone. "There's something happening behind the scenes, and you need to know about it before someone else spins the story." Celeste folded her arms. "Go on." Frankie handed her a printout of an email thread, forwarded, replied, and resent so many times that the subject line had become a mess of FWDs and REs. "Patricia's husband, Alan Lancaster, has been calling some of his contacts at the Post. There's a quiet push to reshape the narrative. Make Patricia look like the savior who launched a redemption arc, not the woman who tried to bury you in silence." Celeste's face went still. "Wait," she said slowly. "He's trying to center her in the story?" Frankie nodded grimly. "More than that. There's an op-ed being pitched about how powerful women can rise from their own missteps. Not one mention of you. Not even once." Celeste's heart ticked faster. "And the podcast interview?" she asked. "Still trending," Frankie replied. "But you know how fast news cycles spin. If this other version gets picked up, you become a footnote in your own story." Celeste leaned against the back of a chair, staring at the box Frankie had brought. "What's in there?" she asked. Frankie opened it carefully and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "She left this at the center yesterday. Said it was for you. Her personal reflections. Letters she wrote but never sent. Some are addressed to her daughter. Others, to you." Celeste hesitated. "I didn't read them," Frankie added. "Wasn't mine to open. But I figured, before this gets any bigger, you should know how real her change actually is. Because once you respond publicly, or don't, it's going to shape more than just this story. It's going to shape the stories of every girl who saw you and thought, that could be me." Celeste sat slowly, fingers brushing the journal's soft spine. "I never asked to become a symbol," she whispered. "You didn't," Frankie said. "But you did become one, and now you get to choose what kind." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning light sharpening into clarity through the glass doors. Then Celeste reached for the journal and opened the first page. Dear Celeste, I hated you when I saw you walk into that gala. Not because you did anything, but because your existence reminded me of everything I was pretending not to be. Celeste's breath caught. She flipped through several pages, each one raw, vulnerable, painfully honest. Patricia hadn't written like someone protecting an image. She'd written like someone trying to clean out a wound. But still, her husband's actions changed everything. Later that afternoon, Celeste met Miles for lunch at their favorite quiet spot downtown, a cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of place where the staff knew their orders and left them alone unless called over. He listened carefully as she explained what Frankie had discovered. Then he folded his napkin, placed it gently on the table, and said, "So, what do you want to do?" "I want to speak," Celeste replied. "Not against Patricia. Not even against Alan. I just want the truth to hold its place before it's swept aside again." Miles gave a small nod. "Then say it clearly. Say it like you did at that table and at that podium and in that studio. Say it for you this time, not as a reaction, but as a declaration." Celeste reached across the table, fingers curling around his. "You always see me." "Because you never needed fixing," he said. "Just the space to be heard." That evening, Celeste sat at her writing desk and opened a fresh document. She titled it simply, "Not a Footnote." And then she wrote, about what happened, about what didn't, about grace being mistaken for weakness, about the strength it takes not to burn the table down, but to rebuild it so others can sit too. She didn't name Patricia in blame, but she didn't erase herself to protect someone else's transformation either. The final lines were the ones she lingered over the most. "I didn't flinch because I've flinched 1,000 times before, and it never helped me rise. I stayed seated because, in that moment, I realized I was done performing for rooms that never clapped for women like me. And now, I build my own rooms." As she hit send, submitting it to the editorial board of The Atlantic, a quiet resolve settled into her chest. She wasn't just part of the narrative anymore. She was shaping its direction, in her own words, on her own terms. The morning her op-ed was published, Celeste woke before the sun. The city still slept outside her window, quiet, hushed, as if it knew something had shifted. She sat at the edge of the bed with her robe pulled tightly around her, heart beating slow and steady, and stared at the blinking cursor on her phone screen as the article loaded. Not a footnote. Her name, bold and unshakable, right beneath the headline. The Atlantic had published it in full. No edits, no softened phrases, no filtered truth. Her words, her voice, out there for the world. She didn't expect the ripple to come so fast. By the time she finished breakfast, the piece had already spread across platforms. Book clubs were dissecting it. Morning shows were quoting it. Influential women, CEOs, artists, senators, were reposting it with captions like, "We've all been Celeste." And in the center of it all, her silence now stood loud and clear. But praise wasn't the only sound rising. By early afternoon, her inbox filled with new messages. Not just support, but invitations, requests for interviews, panel discussions, book deals, political endorsements. And then came the unexpected one. A text from Patricia. "We need to talk. Please, not for the press, for the truth." Celeste stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. She knew what this was. Patricia had read the article, and she'd seen what it meant for her carefully navigated redemption arc. But part of Celeste still wanted to believe the change in Patricia was real, that it hadn't just been convenience masquerading as humility. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she poured herself a glass of lemon water, walked out to the back porch, and sat under the magnolia tree, the branches heavy with blossoms. Miles joined her minutes later, wordless, holding a folded newspaper. "I assume you've seen the coverage?" he asked gently. She nodded. "And the text?" Celeste exhaled. "I saw it." Miles waited, not pushing, just present. "I don't want to play into the narrative," she finally said. "But I also don't want to make enemies out of people trying to do better." He tilted his head. "There's something I learned from watching you through all this," he said. "You're not responsible for anyone else's transformation, only your truth." She looked down at the grass, her voice barely a whisper. "What if talking to her derails that truth?" "Then you don't talk," he replied. "But if it brings peace, clarity even, you have every right to walk into that room on your own terms." Celeste sat with that for a while. Then she stood, walked inside, and replied with one word: "Tomorrow." They met at a quiet tea house off Broad Street, one of those dimly lit places with velvet curtains and tiny tables pressed close together. Celeste arrived first and took a seat by the window, her back straight, her expression unreadable. Patricia walked in moments later, a step slower than usual. She wasn't dressed in her usual designer flair, no statement jewelry, no camera-ready smile. Just a simple blouse, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired but clear. She sat down across from Celeste. "I'm not here to ask you to retract anything," Patricia began, "and I'm not here to spin it." Celeste said nothing, her gaze steady. "I read the piece 3 times, Patricia continued. "And every time, I realized I wasn't the person I thought I was." "That's not for me to decide," Celeste said. "That's your reflection to sit with." Patricia nodded slowly. "Alan didn't tell me about the article he was pushing. I found out when the editor called me to verify a quote I didn't even say. I shut it down the moment I heard." Celeste arched an eyebrow. Convenient timing. Patricia didn't argue. She reached into her bag and placed something on the table. It was a sealed envelope. "I drafted my resignation from the board of the mentorship program," she said softly. "If you think it's the right thing to do, I'll step down." Celeste stared at the envelope. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Stepping down won't undo what happened. And it won't erase the work that still needs to be done. But I'll tell you what will matter. How you show up next. Not for me. For the women who don't have a microphone. For the girls who are still taught to shrink." Patricia's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "Good," Celeste replied, "because I'm not here to offer it." A beat of silence passed between them. "I'm here to remind you that accountability doesn't end when the applause starts." Patricia sat back slowly, taking that in. Celeste reached for her tea, lifted the cup with a quiet grace that had never faltered, and added one final sentence. "If you want to lead women, you need to listen to them when they're silent. That's where the real stories live." They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They simply stood, 2 women whose lives had crossed like a seam being stitched, not perfectly, but permanently. And as Celeste stepped back into the Charleston sun, her phone vibrated in her purse. A new message. "Your piece changed something at the state level. They want to meet." Her next chapter wasn't just unfolding. It was demanding her voice at an even bigger table. The conference room inside the state capitol was nothing like Celeste imagined. No grand oak panels, no gleaming chandeliers, just a long table, a circle of chairs, and the faint scent of strong coffee lingering in the air. There was something refreshing about its simplicity, like the room was built more for decisions than for decor. She stood at the threshold for a beat, taking it all in, before stepping inside. Dressed in soft navy with pearl earrings, Celeste carried no briefcase, no stack of documents, just herself, and the quiet clarity of a woman who knew her worth didn't need armor. A woman in her early 60s, Senator Evelyn Monroe, stood and extended a hand. "Ms. Rivers, thank you for making the time." Celeste returned the handshake. "Thank you for the invitation." Evelyn gestured to the seat beside her. "We've all read your piece." It wasn't just powerful, it was necessary. As Celeste sat, she glanced around the room, a mix of legislators, non-profit leaders, and educational advocates. Some faces familiar from news headlines, others from quiet, behind-the-scenes work. They weren't all smiling. Some wore skepticism like a second skin, but they were all present. That mattered more. Evelyn spoke first. "We're considering launching a statewide initiative that supports mentorship programs for underrepresented girls in leadership tracks, starting at the middle school level. We want your voice at the core of it." Celeste tilted her head slightly. "You already have a dozen policy experts at this table. Why me?" The woman across from her, a retired judge, spoke up. "Because your words move the people we've spent years trying to reach. And because you didn't just make a point, you made space." Celeste folded her hands on the table. "If I say yes, I need it to be more than symbolism. No ribbon cuttings with no follow-up, no headlines that fade in 2 weeks." "Agreed," Evelyn said. "This isn't about spotlight. It's about substance." There it was, the offer to build something, not just critique it. Celeste took a breath. "Then I'm in. But I want to work directly with the schools, with the girls. This can't be a top-down initiative." A few nods, a few notes scribbled, a shared understanding rising like steam in the room. Afterward, Celeste stepped outside into the bright Carolina afternoon. As she walked down the Capitol steps, she felt her phone buzz again. A text from Frankie. "Are you seeing the news?" Celeste frowned and tapped the screen. Patricia Lancaster had just released a public letter, an open reflection on her missteps, the privilege she'd weaponized without realizing it, and the reckoning she'd faced not just from the public, but from within her own family. The final paragraph struck hard. "I will never reclaim the dignity I tried to strip from another woman, nor should I. But I will spend the rest of my public life amplifying voices I once ignored, starting with the one I owe everything to, Celeste Rivers." Celeste blinked, reading it again. She wasn't sure if it was redemption, but it was honest. That night, as the house quieted and the world began to fade to black outside her windows, Celeste and Miles curled up together on the living room sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, his arm resting over her shoulder like a blanket. "You're not surprised by any of this, are you?" she asked softly. He smiled, kissing the side of her temple. "I've always known you weren't built for background roles." Celeste looked at the fireplace, though it wasn't lit. "There's still so much work to do." "There always will be," he said. "But you're not doing it alone anymore." She rested her head against his chest and listened to the rhythm of his heartbeat, the steady reassurance of love without performance. Then her phone chimed again. This time it was from Ruthie. A simple photo. Celeste standing at the podium that night, her hand resting on her heart, the crowd in a hush around her. Below it, a caption. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the room. Celeste closed her eyes, and let the emotion wash over her. Not as a storm, but as a tide that carried something far more enduring than applause. Legacy. Not built in grand moments, but in every decision to show up when it would have been easier not to speak when silence was expected, to hold the door open and leave it that way. The following week brought a new kind of stillness to Celeste's life, not the silence of being overlooked, but the quiet hum of forward motion. Purpose now had a rhythm. It showed up in the early morning planning calls with the state mentorship initiative, in the handwritten letters from young girls, in the way she now walked into rooms without needing to brace herself. But beneath all that progress was something unresolved, something deeply personal. Her mother. Evelyn Rivers had always been a private woman, proud, proper, rooted in dignity and tradition. She hadn't said much after Celeste's article had gone viral. No phone calls, no flowers, just a short email. I read it. You said it well, Mama. That was it. Celeste knew her mother's love ran deep, but it often came wrapped in restraint. And as a child, she had learned to translate silence into affection, nods into pride. Still, part of her, especially now, yearned for more. One Thursday afternoon, on a whim, Celeste drove the 3 hours back to her hometown of Aiken. Miles had offered to come, but she needed to do this alone. She hadn't walked through the front door of her childhood home in over a year. The creak of the floorboards, the smell of lemon polish and worn pages. It all hit at once. Memory opened its arms wide. Her mother stood in the living room, arms crossed, apron dusted with flour. You drove all this way without calling first? Celeste smiled. I figured if I called, you'd say, don't bother. Evelyn didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You figured right. Celeste walked in and set her bag down. Smells like pound cake. Your favorite, her mother said. Didn't know if you'd stay long, but I made it anyway. They moved through the small talk easily. How was Miles? How was work? Did the gardenia bush finally bloom this year? But it all sat atop a heavier conversation neither of them had yet invited in. It came as they sat at the kitchen table, cake slices untouched between them. Evelyn spoke first. I was proud of you, even before all this. Celeste looked up, surprised. I know I didn't say it, her mother continued, but I watched that video, the one from the gala, and I saw you sit there, still as a statue, while the world looked on like it didn't know what to do with your stillness. Her voice trembled, just slightly. You were always quiet, even as a little girl, but you listened. You watched, and when you finally spoke, it was never for show. It was for something bigger. You have your father's strength, and my stubborn heart. Celeste blinked fast. I thought you didn't agree with me writing that article. Evelyn sat back in her chair. I didn't agree with how exposed it left you. We come from a generation where we protect our truths, keep them in the family. But just because I wouldn't have done it, doesn't mean you were wrong. Silence stretched, then folded itself into something more tender. I don't want to be a footnote in your life either, her mother added softly. Celeste reached across the table and took her mother's hand. You aren't. You're the first sentence. Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes. She shook her head and laughed a little. You always were better with words. The weight that had followed Celeste from Charleston finally loosened its grip. Later, as she packed her bag to leave, her mother handed her a small envelope. I was going to mail this, she said. But now, I'm glad I didn't. Inside was a photo. Celeste at age 10, standing on the steps of her elementary school, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "I deserve to be heard." "You've been saying it your whole life," Evelyn said. "Now the world's finally listening." Driving back to Charleston, the sun dipped behind the trees in long golden streaks, and Celeste felt something close to peace pressing against her ribs. She wasn't just building something new, she was healing what came before. And that, more than the headlines, the interviews, the applause, was the legacy she hoped would last. The week following her visit to Aiken moved like a dream Celeste didn't want to wake from. The air in Charleston had shifted, softer, lighter. It wasn't just spring easing into the breeze. It was something internal, something she'd earned. She sat in the courtyard of a small cafe off Church Street, sipping ginger tea while reviewing a proposal draft for the mentorship initiative. Sunlight flickered through the moss-draped oaks overhead. Her laptop buzzed with emails, but she let them wait. For once, she wasn't rushing. Across the table, Ruthie stirred cream into her coffee with a sly smile. "You look different." Celeste glanced up. Different how? Like someone who just forgave a version of herself she thought she had to bury to survive. Celeste gave a small laugh, surprised. "You always say things like that." "I'm always right," Ruthie said, sipping dramatically. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Ruthie leaned in, voice lower now. "You know there's something you still haven't done." Celeste didn't ask. She already knew. The gala. The Foundation's annual spring gala was only a few days away. The same one where everything had unraveled last year. The same stage, the same room. A different Celeste. "I haven't decided," she said softly. "It's not about them," Ruthie replied. "It's about the part of you that froze when that wine hit your dress. That part of you deserves to walk back in standing tall." Celeste sat back. Her pulse was steady, but her thoughts scattered like leaves. She knew Ruthie was right, but returning didn't just mean showing up. It meant confronting it all. The whispers, the expectations, the fragile apologies. It meant giving herself permission to own the space she'd once been pushed to the edge of. "I'll think about it," Celeste said, and meant it. Later that evening, after dinner with Miles, she found herself staring at the invitation card again. White with gold trim. Elegant. Unapologetic. Miles came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You should go," he said quietly. She looked over her shoulder. "Even if it's a circus?" "Especially if it is," he smiled. "Because now you're not in the crowd. You're the headliner." Celeste turned the card over in her hand. For the first time, she felt no fear, only resolve. She nodded. "Then let's pick something that says I didn't come to whisper." The night of the gala, Celeste walked into the ballroom wearing a deep emerald gown that moved like water around her. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, earrings delicate but firm. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to be seen, on her own terms. As she stepped into the room, all chatter seemed to pause. Faces turned, some smiled, others whispered, but no one looked away. She saw Patricia across the room, standing near the dessert table, clutching a small plate of lemon tart. Their eyes met. Patricia nodded first. It was small, but it was enough. Frankie approached from the side, dressed in a tuxedo with a pink satin bow tie. "Charleston royalty returns," he whispered dramatically. Celeste chuckled under her breath. I'm just here for the mini cheesecakes. Liar, he grinned. You came to make peace with the room. Maybe he was right. When the event coordinator stepped to the microphone, calling for attention before the awards presentation, Celeste didn't flinch. A year ago, that sound had made her stomach tighten. Now, it simply marked another beginning. And now, the coordinator announced, we'd like to recognize someone whose voice didn't just echo, it changed the direction of our city's future. There was a pause. Celeste's heart stopped. To Celeste Rivers, thank you for turning silence into movement. Applause thundered. Celeste blinked, stunned. She hadn't known they were going to do this. She hadn't prepared anything. No speech, no clever quote. Just her truth. Frankie gave her a nudge. Go on. She stepped up to the small stage, the same one where she'd sat in discomfort 12 months ago. She didn't touch the microphone. She just looked around the room and spoke. I never wanted to be the story, she said. I just didn't want to disappear in someone else's version of it. A hush spread again. I came tonight because I needed to see this space differently. And I'm grateful that tonight it welcomed me back with eyes wide open. She smiled, genuine, warm, unshaken. I accept this, not as a closing chapter, but as an invitation to keep writing. Applause again. This time, not for survival, for return. As she stepped down, Miles met her halfway, his eyes full of quiet pride. You were flawless, he said. I was honest, she corrected. That's better. And for the rest of the night, she didn't blend into any shadows. She danced. She laughed. And when the music slowed, she let herself exhale, for the first time in a long time. Not out of relief, but joy. A soft drizzle swept across Charleston as the sun struggled to push through the gray. The clouds weren't heavy with gloom. They were gentle, quiet. Like the city itself had taken a long breath and was now exhaling. Celeste stood near the window of her new mentorship center downtown, overlooking the courtyard where a group of middle school girls were laughing beneath oversized umbrellas. One twirled in circles like the rain was music just for her. The center, the Rivers house, had officially opened that morning. No ribbon cutting, no press conference. Just the girls, their families, a few board members, and people who understood that real beginnings often came quietly. Behind her, Ruthie was setting up coffee in the kitchen. You sure you don't want to do one of those fancy, grand opening speeches? She called out. People do like hearing your voice these days. Celeste smiled to herself. They'll hear it in the work. That's the only voice that matters. Ruthie peeked out. I swear, you sound more and more like your mama every day. I'll take that as the compliment it is. Just then, a knock at the door pulled Celeste from the window. Miles stepped inside, holding a bouquet of fresh-cut gardenias. For the founder, he said, handing them over with a quiet grin. Celeste accepted them, breathing in their clean, sweet scent. You remembered? Of course, he said. Your mama told me once that gardenias were your reminder of grace and persistence. Celeste set them in a vase near the front desk. It still feels surreal. This building, these girls. Miles slid his arm around her waist. It's not surreal. It's what happens when a woman stops waiting for a seat at the table and builds her own. She rested her head on his shoulder for a moment, letting that truth settle in. Just then, the front door swung open again. Patricia Lancaster stepped inside. No entourage, no press. Just her. She held a stack of books and a tentative smile. "I brought some new titles for the library," she said. "I hope that's all right." Celeste met her gaze, searching it. Not for guilt, not for perfection. Just truth. "It's more than all right," Celeste said. Patricia walked further in, setting the books on a nearby shelf. "There's one in there that meant a lot to me as a girl. Roll of Thunder. Hear My Cry. I didn't understand why back then. I do now." Celeste nodded, her voice low. "Sometimes we're drawn to truths long before we're ready to face them." Patricia looked around the space. "It's beautiful here. It feels different." "It is," Celeste replied. "It's not built on silence." Patricia hesitated. "I know no apology can erase what happened. I just hope my actions now—" Celeste raised a hand, gently stopping her. "You're here." "That speaks louder than anything you could say." A pause. Then Patricia nodded, her eyes glistening, and quietly slipped out again. No need for ceremony. Ruthie walked in moments later, holding her phone. "You might want to see this?" Celeste took it and pressed play. It was a news segment, brief but heartfelt. The reporter stood outside the Rivers house, speaking about its launch, its mission, its vision. And then they cut to a girl in braids and a bright yellow jacket, standing under one of the umbrellas outside. "She talks to us like we matter," the girl said. "Not like we're someday important, like we're important right now." Celeste handed the phone back and blinked away, the sting in her eyes. Later that afternoon, the girls had gone home. The halls were quiet again. Celeste walked room to room, running her fingers along the bookshelves, peeking into the art room, smiling at the quotes painted above each door. "You belong here." Your voice changes things. Never shrink for small minds. In the main office, a letter waited for her on the desk. She unfolded it slowly, recognizing her mother's cursive. "You were born into a world that would ask you to be less, but you chose more. I see you. I am proud of you. And I hope one day, when you are tired or afraid, you remember that your strength didn't begin the day you spoke up. It began the day you chose to live with your head high in a world that would rather you look down." Tears slipped down Celeste's cheeks. Quiet, warm, steady. She sat in the desk chair, facing the window again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were lifting, and the courtyard, still wet from the storm, sparkled like glass under a new light. A knock at the door. She turned to see a young girl standing there, backpack slung low, holding a notebook. "Hi," she said shyly. "I heard this is the place where you can talk about things that people don't always understand." Celeste stood, her voice soft. "It is. Come in." The girl stepped inside and the door clicked shut behind her. A new chapter. Not in a book, but in a life. Celeste didn't need applause anymore. She had something far better. A legacy of courage that others could now step into and expand. Thanks for watching Sky Millionaire, where kindness meets real life. At Sky Millionaire, we believe every act of generosity deserves to be shared. So stay tuned and keep spreading hope with Sky Millionaire.